Okay, well, it's the stroke of 10 a.m. Good morning, everyone. I'm Luli Castro, Swiftland's Executive Director, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to Swiftland's Diversity Discovery Institute Year 2 webinar. I is for Identity. We have a wonderful learning opportunity ready for you this morning with Miss Dieta Jones. And for over 20 years, Dieta Jones has guided people and organizations through the process of fundamental transformation. She has been a leading voice in shaping contemporary thinking and practice around integrated and sustainable approaches to workplace culture, diversity, and inclusion. Her years of experience as a management consultant, diversity and inclusion educator, organization development and training professional have led her to being one of the most sought-after speakers and consultants in the library community. And it's our pleasure to have her with us this morning. So please welcome Dieta and enjoy her webinar this morning. Dieta?
Good morning. Thank you so much, Luli, for that introduction, and good morning to everyone who is here with us today in this webcast. I am a little bit jealous. I know you all are talking about, the differences in weather in Florida. I live in Chicago, so I trump all of you as far as bad weather. Huh? But it's great to be part of this webcast this year and this morning. I was invited to be part of this webinar series because of the work that I've done around diversity and inclusion in libraries and in many other kinds of organizations for going on 25 years now. My background is in higher education. My very first work, professionally speaking, was as a diversity and inclusion educator at a campus. I went on to be adjunct faculty at two different Carnegie One research institutions, teaching graduate level courses on diversity and inclusion and leadership. I've been the director of a human rights office for a city government where I investigated and mediated complaints of discrimination, as well as piloted and continue to this day to be involved in a number of different community diversity and inclusion learning experiences where we bring people together to explore how it is that we can create the kind of socially just communities that we want to live in and that will allow us to flourish rather than just responding to the negative experiences that we have so many of, unfortunately. So this is a topic that I am particularly passionate about. I'm thrilled that Swiftland has put it together in a multi-part webcast series because it allows for hopefully learning over time. It allows for you to have, as Luli was saying, many voices and many different perspectives and approaches to thinking about this important topic of diversity, how it applies to you as individuals, how it applies to your work as a professional, and how it could potentially apply to your organization and organizational culture change. And so this is a great opportunity for us to spend some time together. I realize that we are don't all have microphone rights, and so what I am going to do is do my very best to not lose my train of thought as I'm speaking to you and follow the chats. But do me a favor, because the chat window is very small, even though I have on my glasses. The chat window is small, so do me a favor. And if you have a chat that you really want me to see, immediately just signal with the raised hand emblem in the upper part of your screen to make sure that I can quickly move my eyes to it and read as quickly as possible. Okay? So the session that I am leading for you today is called I is for Identity. And what we're going to talk some about is how important it is to understand identity, your own identity, and the identity of others, and some of the things that go into shaping identity diversity is about a lot of things, and you've already started having conversations about what is diversity and about the many access points to the discussion of diversity. Identity is absolutely one of the critical first elements, first steps on the journey to developing a more mature and holistic perspective about the diversity that I myself bring to an experience or that other people have to offer in our relationship building that we will continue to do as professionals and as humans. And then we'll go on throughout the series to talk about other topics. So please know that we will continue to unfold, that this series is going to be peeling back the onion, so to speak, over time, and that for today we're just going to start off with a more personal look at the identity level. And I invite you, even though we're not on the microphone at the same time, to really do some reflective activity along the way. I've built in some opportunities for some personal reflection and ask you to take some time and do some personal reflection and share some of your thoughts in the chat window so that we can, to the extent possible, make this participatory. Okay? So let's start off with thinking a little bit about what is identity really about, and a little bit about this journey that we're beginning. So why do we need to understand and embrace the elements of our own identity? I hear a lot of times, especially when I do diversity and inclusion work, particularly people who are white in the United States, telling me, my identity is so plain vanilla. I don't really see myself as part of this, journey. I don't see myself as part of the discussion related to diversity. I care about it. I want to be an ally, but I myself don't have anything to contribute. I'd like to say right up front, I just don't believe that's true. I really believe, and hopefully by the end of this webcast, all of us will be in a place of having a more fulsome understanding of our own identity and the richness associated with each of your identities, each of our identities, regardless of our cultural or racial background. And it's also necessary as the first step in your cultural proficiency journey. I'll talk a little bit more about this proficiency journey over the course of the webcast and the sessions that I have with you. But, a lot of times what we think is either I am or I am not diverse, and I either have or do not have something to contribute to this topic. And it is my belief that this journey is about all of us, that cultural proficiency is about not just building awareness, but also building skills and competencies and confidence. So hopefully we'll see this as a journey, and understanding identity and the lenses through which I see the world will be the very first step. So number two is it's necessary for understanding the lenses through which you see and interact with others. All of us bring our own understanding and kind of biases to how we interact with other people. And biases don't necessarily mean things that are negative. It's the values and the belief systems through which we have come to be acculturated that allow us to be able to interact and interpret the world around us. And it's essential that we understand those lenses. All of us have this related to culture and related to everything in every way, in every interaction that we have in this world. We have some lenses through which we're interpreting data. And it's important for us as practitioners, as professionals, as humans, as allies to understand those lenses and then to be able to make choices about how it is that we're interpreting and then acting upon what it is that we're seeing. And then the third point here is that understanding and embracing your own identity allows you to harness the power of your own personal story as a practitioner, leader, and ally, that your story is valuable and valid, and regardless of where you come from or what your racial or ethnic background is or cultural heritage is or a familiarity or comfort level with talking about diversity and inclusion, you still have an awful lot to contribute. And it's helpful for us to start shaping how it is that you'd like to be an active ally. So if every journey begins with a personal story, then I think it's only appropriate that I start off by sharing a little bit about my personal story. I shared with you a little bit about my professional background, but I want to share with you a little bit about my personal story because it has led me to the work that I do today and the work that I've always done for the past 25 years. So I'm going to start off with my personal story, starting with my father. My father comes from a little town in Arkansas, Marianna, Arkansas. It's a very small town. As you can see from this picture, if you can see this, it's so small that we're still trying to figure out if the apostrophe becomes before or after the S. This is actually what I remember when I was when I was a child. I didn't grow up in Marianna, Arkansas, but my father did, and he was one of 18 children, which wasn't particularly uncommon. 18 is a lot, but large families were not necessarily uncommon where and when he was a child. And my father, as one of 18 children, was the contemporary of this little boy. Does anybody know who this little boy is? Go ahead and type it in the chat window if you know who this is. I see someone typing. Emmett Till. That's right, absolutely. And so Emmett Till, that face, once you see that face once, you'll never forget it, Mary. Emmett Till was a little black boy who lived in Chicago with his mother and went to visit his great uncle and cousins in Mississippi. And he was accused of whistling at a white girl on the street, and a couple of nights later he was taken from his bed at his great uncle's house, beaten. His eyes were gouged out. He was severely beaten, shot in the head, tied to a cotton gin, and left his body left in the river. They found him, his very bloated and disfigured body, several days later. And his mother, who was worried sick about him going to the South anyway because her son Emmett was quite spirited and she didn't know if he'd be able to adjust to the norms of the South at that time, allowed his body to be displayed in an open casket funeral because she wanted other mothers to know what they're doing to little black boys in the South. This ignited a huge fire in the South. Now, there was already a lot that was going on there at that time and before that, but it really became very clear that that big mamas, like my big mama, need to really think about the safety and security of their little black boys. And so my father, who is now on the left side of the screen, was one of 18 children. My big mama took 3 or 4 of the boys who were right around the teenage years, similar to Emmett, and sent them up to Illinois, to a little town that was predominantly white at the time. So my father was shipped away to live with distant relatives in a suburb of Chicago that was predominantly white, heavily Jewish, and shipped away from his family and everything that he knew because he was black. And so the messages that he integrated into his own understanding of the world at that time was that being black is bad and dangerous. And once he got to Illinois, the folks there actually were quite loving and generous with him, but very quickly put him into psychiatric care to try to help him figure out how to adjust and behave properly in order to navigate his new environment. And what he took from those counseling sessions was that he needed to behave more like white people, whatever that meant, and he needed to figure out how to be less black and more white. So from a very early stage in his life, he believed that his blackness was actually something to be ashamed of and hidden, and was actually a deficit. My mother, on the other hand, grew up in a very, very large family, and 10 brothers and sisters, and she had grew up in a suburb of Chicago that was predominantly black and Puerto Rican. And she had very fair skin. She was one of those girls who didn't tan. She freckled. She's a very, very shy person. She's always been very shy and very kind of insecure. And she always wanted to get kind of the attention and have the big personalities that she associated with some of the Black and Puerto Rican girls around her. And so my parents met in the suburbs of Chicago, one because he hated being Black and wanted to access more whiteness, and the other because she hated being white and wanted to be a little bit more brown. They were the perfect match, unfortunately. They both desired what the other had, and they got together and had me and my siblings. And it was at a time before, this was a time before it was cool to be mixed, right? This was before Halle Berry and Tiger Woods and them. So I grew up with two parents, each of whom really hated their own identities and sent me nothing but negative messages about each of them. And there weren't other people around who looked like me. And so my identity was really shaped early on in my life as something that was kind of fractured and not built on something that was about being positive or being celebratory or proud. And it was my own desire, once I got to my college years, this is in Fort Collins, Colorado. That is not me, but this is in Fort Collins, Colorado, where I ended up going to college. It was in my college years that I really started doing identity development work, and I studied identity development as an academic subject. I did quite a lot of research and writing on it, and my first master's degree really heavily focused on identity development and counseling. And I realized that my own search for understanding my identity was not unusual, that a lot of us go through identity development journeys around culture, but also around many aspects of who we are, and including generational sorts of things, age appropriate kind of understanding of what it means to come of age, and things like independence and understanding and clearly internalizing one's own values and belief systems independent of our parents or the primary caregivers or influencers that we've had to date. And I really started understanding that, and I was catapulted into that because I was really seeking to understand who I was and where I came from. And that's been a journey that I've continued to be on for the rest of my life, and one that I feel really passionately about, and continue to do work around this. I went on after I, in my earliest years, started doing identity development work that got me along the path of doing diversity and multicultural education. In the mid-90s, I transitioned and took a role with the Association of Research Libraries, which is based in Washington, D.C. The Association of Research Libraries is a not-for-profit that represents the largest academic and research libraries in the United States and Canada. Many of you are probably familiar with FLA and ALA. ARL is a little bit different in that it's research library specific and it's institutionally based membership. So I had a smaller pond, but a really rich experiences. And this is a picture of me in Tiananmen Square. And I put this picture in here as part of my journey because it was through the Association of Research Libraries and the work that I did there that I had a lot of opportunity to do international travel. And I spoke on leadership and libraries and diversity and inclusion around the world. And it was another piece of my own identity development journey where I realized it's not just about me with a Black parent and a white parent and, and the socioeconomic experiences that I had had to date, or the religious kind of marginalization that I had felt to date because I came from a religion that wasn't really understood by a lot of people, and had to often feel kind of marginalized because of my religious background. I went on to be able to really take my whole identity development and cultural proficiency journey to an international stage by being able to travel the world, and got an appreciation for just how rich the different cultural experiences are and can be, even as a tourist. And that's been a really tremendous piece of my own journey and one that I really value. And it's something also that I carry forward even as I think about now being a parent. So I say and back because now I am a parent and I am back in Chicago and I'm raising my own little one. And the values that I share with him are the values that come from my journey. And also I am clear about the lenses through which I see the world because I've been doing this work for a long time, my own personal work. I don't mean work as in a consultant or a speaker, but my own personal work. And I want his story to start in a more healthy, loving, strengths-based place than my own story started. And so we spend a lot of time talking about his identity and talking about what it means to be a citizen of the world and how important it is to understand and connect with different cultures and really be able to understand the richness that people can bring from different cultural experiences. So that's just a little bit about my story, and this is my partner on the other side. And he and I do quite a lot of work together from a philanthropic point of view. We have a foundation, and we also do a weekly radio show. But one of the things that we both agree on is how important it is to celebrate our identities and the identities of other people, and then really be allies where and when we can. So I share a little bit about that because we all have a journey, and I hope that when I was sharing my story, you were thinking about your own story and a little bit about your own journey and how your journey has influenced, shaped the way that you see the world, the way that you interact with the world. Whether it's at a personal level or a professional level, some of the choices that you've made as far as being a practitioner, it's probably in some way, shape, or form influenced the career path that you chose. The career path that many of us as librarians have chosen is passion driven. This comes from something. Most of us didn't just stumble upon this. There's something that's deeply anchored in the way that we care about issues and values associated with equity and access and information that led us to be part of this professional community. And so identity really encompasses all of those things, and this is an invitation to think about the elements of your own identity and the influence that they played on your life. So one of the things that I'll say is that, yeah, we've talked a lot over the years around diversity and diversity and being sensitive to the fact that we're different, but we're way past that now, right? So tolerance and sensitivity, that's the language that we were using back in the early and mid-90s when I first started doing this work. I didn't like it then because it sounds unpalatable. I really think that we're more appropriately now in a place where it's about building cross-cultural competence. It's about building the ability and the tools and skills and confidence necessary in order to interact more dynamically, to be able to learn, to not feel like we have to have all the right answers, but that we're comfortable asking questions of each other, of ourselves, of our users, that will allow us to make appropriate adjustments, whether that be to our mindsets or to our programming or services or the way that we navigate relationships. And so we're really past the place where we're talking about being sensitive to diversity and much more at a place where we're thinking about how do we build the skills and the competencies necessary in order to navigate the very diverse world in which we live. And it's tricky because the things that are pronounced are changing, and the language is changing. And by the way, it's changing quickly, right? So as you all know, you live in the same world that I do. You have the same television stations that I have. It's difficult. Last year, this time, everything that was on the news was about, ending violence against women. And then we had these, horrible shootings where, the police and black community and Black Lives Matter were everywhere. That's what we're thinking about and trying to figure out. And then we have, big conversations about our relationships with Cuba. And now we're having conversations about gender identity and conversations and questions about, the pronoun that we use to interact with people across different gender identities, which is very, very new for a lot of people. A lot of people are still getting their mind around same-sex marriage, and all of a sudden we are very quickly into a conversation about pronouns. That's really fast-paced as far as our understanding and our desire and our need to be able to keep our language up to date and be able to really navigate the quickly changing landscape that we're living in. And even more recently, everything that we're thinking about is related to religion, especially since we've had these attacks in Paris and other places that have led to really, really pronounced conversations about religion and religious persecution and religious tolerance and understanding. And so it's a really interesting time to be in this space and thinking about diversity and inclusion and thinking about building cross-cultural competence, because it's daunting to imagine truly being competent with all of the different issues that are coming at us. So one of the things that I'll say here is that it is not my belief that being 100% competent and proficient with every issue is necessary right now. What we want is to aspire, right? What we want is to have an understanding that culture and cross-cultural relationships are dynamic, that it's worth our while to care about and to see ourselves as ongoing students. It's worth our while to lean into our discomfort. It's worth our while to try to build our own awareness and to understand where we come from, so that when we do come into a situation when we're confronting a new situation or new terminology or new ideology, we are able to weigh it from a place of, vetting it through our own true north. And so that's where we are now. This is not me saying I think that the place for all practitioners to be is where we're absolutely comfortable and competent across every culture-specific issue. That's too much to ask. It's a changing and dynamic field. So let me tell you what I mean when I talk about culture, because I'm using the language culture a lot, and I think that culture is actually a very helpful framework for entering into these conversations, that most of the work that we do can be framed out by thinking about culture. So this model that you see here is called the iceberg analogy of culture. It's an incredibly common model. It's not one that I created. And it's been around ever since the beginning of the interculturalist research back in the 20s. The iceberg analogy of culture is very helpful because it shows that, like an iceberg, culture is oftentimes hidden, and that it's very large, it's very complicated. And just like an iceberg, it's often the parts that we don't even see that can sink ships and potentially sink relationships. So this iceberg analogy shows that, an iceberg, about 10, maybe 15% of an iceberg is above the waterline, but the vast majority of an iceberg is below the waterline. The pieces of the iceberg that are above the waterline are called objective culture, or big C culture. Objective culture are the things that you can see and interact with relatively easily and gain some data about it that can be taken as fact. So how people dress, the way the streets are laid out, the way that the signage in your organization or on the streets in the city, for example, the languages that people are speaking, those sorts of things. So let's pretend, I grew up around a lot of folks who are from Puerto Rico. Let's pretend that all of us are going to Puerto Rico for a visit, and our big C culture experience of Puerto Rico, if we all went for a week, would be the things that we'd be able to capture on a video camera, for example, right? We'd be able to see the food, listen to the languages that people are talking, see how people are dressed, see how the streets are laid out, those sorts of things. We'd be able to see the system of government, right? We'd understand from a policy point of view who's in charge of what. The subjective culture is the stuff that's underneath of the waterline. Subjective culture is also called little c culture. It's the pieces of culture that are not as apparent. It wouldn't be the pieces that we could see or interact with as easily using a video camera, for example. Little c culture are things that typically we get to know when we have a longer term and more intimate relationship with the culture. So if we went to Puerto Rico as a group for 3 or 4 days, we probably wouldn't get to know much about the little c culture. If we went to Puerto Rico for 2 years on a work assignment, wouldn't that be lovely, coming from Chicago, then I would probably get to know a lot more about the little c culture. And what I would come to understand are things like the norms, right? How people interact with each other. What are some of the hierarchies? How things really work around here, right? So I may know that the protocol says to do X and Y, but I would also get to know after being there for 2 years who the real movers and shakers or influencers are who help me navigate the culture or help me really get things done. In your organization, in every organization, you also have this exact same kind of anatomy of culture that's in action. So this iceberg analogy works for sociological cultures. It also works for organizational cultures. It's the exact same appropriate model. So in your library, you have the same thing. You have the big C culture, you have the physical space, you have the signage, you have how people dress, you have a sense of your users, you have the org chart, and then you have the little c culture. And the little c culture is the stuff that as a staff member, a new staff member, you probably didn't get to know it until you were there for a period of time. Some people, it takes a year or 2 years to actually feel proficient navigating the little c culture. It's not just what you do or why you do it, but what you do or how you do it, but it's the why you do it. So it's the traditions, it's the language, it's the reason that you celebrate certain things, it's the reason why you have certain inside jokes when you're sitting around at a staff meeting. It's who you go to in order to get things done. So this culture is actually incredibly important to have a sense of as a big framework. I love to start with culture, and I will refer back to this iceberg analogy in the subsequent webinars that I do with you, because as I said, I think that this is a helpful framework for thinking about all things related to diversity and inclusion, and so it will be hopefully a good touchstone. The other thing that I'll say about this is that there's a difference between, from an understanding point of view, culture general versus culture specific information. What I'm talking about here and now, and for a lot of the rest of the webinar, is going to be culture general, which means it doesn't apply to a specific culture only, which is helpful. It's helpful to have the concepts that apply across all cultures, so then when you come in contact with a specific culture or a specific situation that you want to interpret through cultural lenses, you have the concepts associated from general culture to help you be able to make the translation. There are a couple of other things that I want to mention about this model. There are a couple of things that are useful, especially if we think about in an organizational setting. And since all of us are professionals here, I thought it would be useful to apply this. When you think about this model as it applies to organizational culture, there is some very specific language that is useful to take into consideration. Above the waterline, those attributes are called artifacts. So artifacts are the kind of physical signifiers or symbols of a culture. Some of the things that I've already described. So thinking about your library, for example, what are some of those artifacts? Right? And those are probably very easy for you to think about and conjure up in your mind's eye. Just below or above the waterline, right at the waterline, is something called espoused values. In an organizational setting, and even in a national setting, we have espoused values. All of your libraries probably have these, even if you don't have them in a formal stated place. Espoused values are those values that we say we stand for, right? The things that we tell the world we value, professionally or organizationally. And espoused values in the library profession oftentimes have to do with service, quality, equity, access, right? The things that are pretty traditional and typical. There may be some other things in there like diversity or other sorts of things that, or innovation that are unique or really differentiate you. Below the waterline and deeper into the heart of the iceberg is another layer of values that are specific to organizations, and that's called values in action. Those are called values in action. And values in action are the behaviors that we actually play out on a day-to-day basis that reflect our values. The reason that there's a gap on this model between espoused values and values in action is because sometimes in real life there is a gap, and people experience a gap between what we say we value and how we behave. The decisions that we make, the language that we use, the way we invite people to be part of teams, the way we hire or promote people, the way we allow people to participate in professional development experiences, whatever it is, the way we coach and mentor people or don't, all of those things are interpreted through the lenses of our colleagues as values and actions. And to the extent that there is a discrepancy between what we say we value and how people interpret our actions, there is oftentimes some issue with trust, individually and potentially even at an organizational level. And I like to call this out because it's really important as practitioners that we know about this perceived or potential for perceived difference between espoused values and values in action, because for most of us, our identities are closely, at a personal level, at a professional level, our identities are closely connected to the values that we hold. And for most of us, we want to be seen as consistent. What we say we value and how we actually behave or are perceived, we want those to have a 1-to-1 ratio. And to the extent that that's not happening, we want to have a sense of why that is so that we can make appropriate adjustments. So hopefully this is helpful language. Let me pause here for a moment and ask, any comments or questions about this iceberg model or about the values, espoused values versus values in action? Anyone? Okay, so I'll keep plugging away here then, but please feel free to chime in. So the next slide is one where I'll ask you, now that we've talked a little bit about culture and the dynamics of culture, is to think about for yourself, what are some of the things that form your identity? All of us have culture. All of us probably have many layers of cultural experiences that inform our identity. All of us probably have a macro culture that we feel part of. You know, we are all living in the U.S., for example, so we see ourselves as part of the U.S. macro culture. But we also probably have micro cultures that we are connected to, whether it be a professional community like we're librarians, or we have something else that's part of our unique cultural identity. You're a woman or a man, or you're a Gen Xer, or you're Latina, or you're African American, or whatever it is. You're a person with a disability, you're a parent. All of us probably have layers and layers of cultural experiences that inform the way that we interact with the world. But all of those are, the way that we come about and interact with all of those is informed by some of the fundamentals that were instilled in us early in our lives. So I invite you to think back on some of your own developmental milestones. Where did you grow up, and what did your family look like? Right? What were some of the core values that were ingrained in you as a child, and how did your family interpret them? Right? So for me, for example, one of the core values that was one of the core values that was ingrained in me as a child was work hard, right? And the way that my family interpreted it was that everyone worked all the time. All the time. Even when we were in the house, we worked. We hardly sat still, right? Sitting down and watching TV and relaxing was actually looked down upon. My mother worked 3 jobs. I was taking care of my younger siblings. And so it was constantly a busy, actively doing interpretation of our value. Now, can I say that that's the way that I want to necessarily live for the rest of my life? It's tricky, but I do oftentimes catch myself constantly saying I need to be doing something, and I even send messages to my own son. I send messages to people I work with, and I have to pull myself back and say, wait a minute, is that really necessary? Does doing more, faster, nonstop actually benefit us? Is that something that is a value that is being misinterpreted? And is the value really about productivity or efficiency or contribution? That I need to reevaluate what that value is that I'm really trying to anchor to, and then how I interpret it. Because just because it was the way that it was interpreted as a child doesn't necessarily mean that it's the most sustainable interpretation as now I am an adult and a supervisor of other people and a parent. Some of the other things that are useful for you to think about potentially as you think about your own identity are some of the personal and professional accomplishments you're most proud of. What are some of the things that you look back on with pride? And I don't mean winning an award or getting a certificate, but some of the things that you feel really proud of. I'm imagining that for a number of you, it's the service that you're able to bring to your users. It's being able to help people solve a problem, right? Or bring people to a place where they have a better quality of life in some way, shape, or form because of something that you were able to do for them. And then the question is, why? Why is that something that's so important to you? If something like that is a personal area of pride, why is that so important to you? What does that say about your identity? Where does that come from, right? And then the last bullet point is about what currently motivates you on a day-to-day basis. What is it that keeps you going? What keeps you going? What is it that hops you out of bed, helps you hop out of bed in the morning? Anybody have answer to that one? What is it that motivates you on a day-to-day basis? I'm particularly interested in this bullet because so many people that I talk to regularly are just stretched really thin. I would love to hear some of the things that keep you motivated. Family, absolutely. Absolutely. Anyone else? My members. Yep. I really love my work. I'm in a good community. Love it. And so the relationships and the work itself, but also the relationships. Wonderful. Family and my daily accomplishments. Nice. Family and work. Opportunity to develop and share creative ideas that fill my thoughts. Love it. And that's the thing. These are the things that, so many of these are about other people, relationships with other people, whether it's your coworkers or your family or your community members, members of your professional circle, or being able to do something that allows you to share your creative ideas and energy. These all, though, are reflections of your identity, right? Not everyone in every industry would give similar answers. There's a lot of people who might have different kinds of answers. This is why it's so important to think about what is my identity and to be clear about what that is, because it also allows you to figure out how you're going to refresh. When you get tired, when you feel like you're hitting a wall, How do you refresh? Well, I might have to build in more family time, or I might have to build in a couple of little times throughout a very hectic day potentially where I look at a photo of my family, or I remember that, or I give myself a couple of minutes to dream about what it is that we're going to do together as a family for Thanksgiving, for example, and start thinking about how it is that you keep yourself refreshed. But also know your identity and the things that are your values are often, even though they might be interpreted differently by different people from different cultural backgrounds, values are oftentimes very similar across cultures. The way that we interpret them across cultures is often different, but the values themselves are very, very consistent across cultures. So another really wonderful thing about understanding and being aware of one's own identity is remembering that the foundation for so many of us at the values level is very similar. And even if I feel like at some point I'm hitting against a cultural wall, if I'm hitting against, the iceberg, if I'm bumping my toe against that iceberg, that under the water stuff that I don't even see coming in an interaction with a user or with a coworker or with a community member, that fundamentally we probably have very similar values. It's just the interpretation of those values that are different, and there's opportunity for us to figure out, okay, how do we navigate this? And part of it is, one, having empathy, and two, being able to and willing to ask the other person to share with you where they're coming from and how and what it is that's driving and motivating them. And that's the opportunity to start having some really rich cross-cultural interactions. So there's a lot of different pieces of our identity that, of course, we want to think about and acknowledge, right? There are so many. So when I talk about culture and identity, I don't just mean kind of race and ethnicity. There are so many ways in which we have rich cultural experiences that we need to be thinking about, right? Everything from gender and ability level to sexual orientation, nationality, generational differences, whether we are immigrant or native born in the United States, introvert or extrovert. As many of you know, there are larger percentages of people who are introverted in the library population than the population at large. And there's also really good research that's come out just in the last 3 or 4 years that talks a lot more explicitly about the power and role of introverts, that acknowledges how important it is to be able to go deep into thought and how important it is to have individual silent time. Even though we, for a number of years started really getting excited, especially in the academic world, about the power of groups, we've kind of pulled back on that some to realize how important it is to be silent, to be quiet, to be thoughtful and deep and reflective, and also to have group time and to feel comfortable navigating both of those. And then, of course, our different professional backgrounds. And in the library community, this is also one that we've wrestled with for years. Really, what is our professional identity? Does everyone have to be an MLS or an MLIS in order to be a professional in our world? And we, of course, are seeing that diversity in the professional contribution area is making us richer. It's acknowledging that there are different skills and experiences that we have to bring, while understanding that our mission is central, and what we're all trying to accomplish is navigated or drawn by that mission. The other thing that's happening is that we are also many things, and so even if we are one thing here or there, we are many things. And so the other thing that I would say here is there are so many pieces of all of us that need to be acknowledged. And one of the things that I would say traditionally we haven't done, even when we write about diversity and inclusion or read about it or talk about it or see it highlighted in the news, I think that we tackle it in too small of a way. We think about diversity or talk about diversity as related to race or ability or gender or sexual orientation, and all those ors are useless. They don't allow me to see my whole self, to think about and encompass and reflect on all of the different things that I am. The other thing that I would say here is that in any point in time, you probably have a couple of different parts of your identity that are more prevalent for you than other pieces, right? So, for example, when I was in my early 20s and I was doing work around diversity and inclusion, I spent a lot more time talking about and thinking about, for myself at least, at a personal level, race. It was something that was, a big issue that was on my own mind and that I was truly trying to wrestle with. As I moved on, I started to understand more and more about how gender and race and socioeconomic issues play together. And so those three were really central to the work that I did and the research that I did and the speaking engagements that I did. Now, I have to be honest. Now I just want to talk about my kid. I am the mother of a 7-year-old, incredibly vibrant child who takes my breath away. And yes, I still have all of those other aspects of myself, plus many that I haven't mentioned so far today. But being a mother is something that I spend a lot of time thinking about and actually takes up a whole lot of my space, a lot of my time in life. And so for many of us, we will have that over the course of our lives. We will have, some of these areas be more pronounced than others, right? So when I first got into the library community, I was 25 years old when I first came to the Association of Research Libraries. My age was something that I got feedback on often because people said, oh, you're too young to be doing this, to be leading this national level audience, to be giving speeches to everyone at Princeton, et cetera, et cetera. And I oftentimes got a really hard time about age. Since then, many years have passed and I don't get as many comments about me being too young for my work in a library. On the other hand, I have a lot of young practitioners who still today come to me and talk about the feelings of not being truly heard or valued fully for their contribution because of their age, or being told, hey, listen, sit down and just sit down and listen and figure out how we do things around here for a while before you stick your neck out there. We don't want you to risk, getting tenure, for example, or we want you to learn how things work around here before you jump in. So there's still a lot of age-related things that we wrestle with in our professional community. So it really is important to think about how different people at different points in their lives and based on their different experiences and lenses through which they see the world will have different things that are important to them. And just because we may look similar doesn't mean that we have the same priorities that are guiding us on a day-to-day basis or the same motivators as far as triggers, things that will motivate us. I'm trying to advance my slides. Here we go. So what we have are, many more multiracial, multi-ethnic people, especially in the state of Florida. This, of course, is happening everywhere. But this is really an opportunity for us to embrace a more holistic perspective about, our approach to identity, and really give people the opportunity, starting with you, the opportunity to describe who you are in a way that is more holistic, more comprehensive, and more realistic. So one of the things that I want to do as far as, let me just pause really quickly. Does anyone have any comments, questions? Anyone have any perspective on some of these blends? Any of you see yourselves as having some really interesting blend, creative way of expressing it that you'd like to share with us? or customers or users that you're interacting with that are new. I'm in a minority as a white person, Beth, in Nicaragua. Are you in Nicaragua? Oh, wow, you're in Nicaragua. Hey, I didn't know that we were international here. Latin American, oh, wonderful. Oh, lovely, lovely. Yes. So you absolutely have a sense of, diversity and being immersed in another cultural reality, right? And that's absolutely right. Nice. Wonderful, Beth. Very cool. Very cool. So speaking about some of the cultural differences, to really jump in and immerse yourself in a new culture, you're doing that deeply. Okay, wait a minute, Patrick. I'm looking. My glasses aren't helping me here. Office professional. I love it. Narcoleptic office professional. I try to pick the best of both worlds. There you go. Jose is trying good. And the best of all worlds, because all of our cultures and all of our cultural experiences have so many areas of richness, right? There are so many things that, of course, we want to explore. And the great thing about culture is that we don't have to pick. This is where cross-cultural competence and proficiency comes from. The more you move in and out of different cultures, then the more proficient you get moving in and out of different cultures. So what often happens, and I don't have a slide for it here, but what often happens is that when you go into a new cultural situation, and so Beth, I'll assume that you're from the U.S. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but you can tell me if that is. Yes, New Jersey. Okay, got it. So Beth, you're from New Jersey, and so you went to Nicaragua probably voluntarily. I'm guessing again what you can type if you want, and then you probably went there. Okay, got it. Voluntarily, and you were excited about that new experience, and you knew that you were going into a new cultural experience, right? But when you got there, what often happens is that something called culture shock. And it's not that you didn't know where you were going or know that it would be culturally different or know that, there would be certain norms that you'd have to learn or adjust to. But there's still something that happens when you go in and you immerse yourself in a new cultural experience that's called culture shock. And culture shock is where you all of a sudden realize that this is very different than what you expected, even if you expected it to be very different. It's harder, it's a little bit more sticky, it's a little bit trickier to make relationships, it's a little trickier to navigate certain things. You miss home a little bit more than you expected. There are certain things that you're not quite getting as quickly as you'd like. By the way, this happens with many transitions into a new culture, even if it's moving from one library system to another library system, right? That's still moving in and out of a different culture. And then what happens is something called the U curve, where after you have a temporary experience of saying, wow, this is a little bit more tricky than I initially thought, or I'm a little bit more uncomfortable, or this adjustment period is a little tricky, what eventually happens is that you start to come out the other side of it and do what is called acculturation, where you start to develop relationships, you start to figure out how to navigate the under the water pieces of the iceberg. You start to realize that some of the practices and values of the host culture really resonate with you or are really consistent with the values that you were already bringing, and you start to really feel like you are starting to take on some of the elements of the new culture. Not that you're letting go of the culture that you had, that you came in with, but you're starting to really feel like you are able to adjust and navigate this new culture. Oh yeah, Jose, there you go. Cuba to Louisville. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I can really see a culture shock there. And so all of us have these experiences moving in and out of different cultures, whether they're major moves or more minor moves. And when I say major, I mean major cultural differences between your home culture and the host culture that you're going into. the more severe the degree of differences are between your home culture and the host culture that you're moving into, the more tricky it is to navigate that transition. But every time you navigate one of those transitions, you become a bit more culturally proficient. And what that means is that you have all new perspective going into the next cultural transition that will make it a little more smooth, a little more knowable, a little less intimidating. The transition period will be a little bit shorter. And we practice doing this over the course of our lives. Some of us get started with this very young. So for example, people who are in military families, right, they practice moving in and out of different cultures from a very, very early point in their lives. So by the time they're adults, they feel this is familiar territory. But for some of us who have less practice with this, then the opportunity here is to give yourself some practice transitioning in and out. Even if you're not going to live, if you're moving somewhere like Cuba to Louisville or New Jersey to Nicaragua, you're still giving yourself exposure, even if it's in your local communities, even if it's reaching out and developing relationships with people who are near you to some extent, and trying to immerse yourself, because that still counts as kind of immersing yourself to some smaller degree, but still substantive degree in developing cultural proficiency. But these are the experiences that are going to be incredibly valuable as we build up our ability to move in and out of cultures in the future. And hopefully we will. Hopefully this is a journey that all of us are invested in and see as valuable, especially given the very, very quickly changing dynamics of the world, but especially Florida. So I have a quick little exercise that I'm just going to walk through at a high level, but it'll talk a little bit about what I was trying to explain here about moving in and out of different cultures. And it's just a very quick little scenario. So I'm going to ask you just to think about for yourself. This is a simple one, but think for yourself. Which of these best represent where you grew up when you were a child? Are you from an urban area, a suburban area, or a rural area, right? As a child. And now, just quickly, some of you, would you type in, say for example, urban, and then one or two attributes associated with how it was when you grew up there? Okay, Claudia's from a rural area. And then one or two of the attributes associated with rural. So, for example, safe or slow or farming or whatever it is that you would associate with your own experience of growing up in a rural place. Farming, okay. Beth, suburban, almost all white, Catholic schools, okay. Suburban, no mall, seasonal tourist town, elderly population, service, okay, got it. Suburban, quiet, no mall, homogeneous, white, Protestant, suburban, okay, good. Suburban, safe, okay. All right, now here's what I'm going to ask you to do. I'm going to ask you to think about one of the other areas, right? So if you grew up in an urban area, knew everyone in a 5-mile radius. Yep, good. If you grew up in an urban area, I'm going to ask you, what did you think of the kids who were in the suburban area? The people who grew up in the suburbs, what did you think about the kids who grew up in the urban area? And then the kids who grew up in the rural area, what did you think about the urban kids? Okay, so urban kids, what did you think about the suburban kids? Suburban kids, what did you think about the urban kids? And then the rural kids, what did you think about the urban kids? Or suburban kids? You got it? The urban guys always beat us Suburban kids in football, tough guys, okay? The urban kids were the tough guys. This is as a child, what were you thinking about the other group? What did you think about when you thought about urban kids? What did you think about suburban kids? Suburban kids, what did you think about urban kids? And rural kids, what did you think about suburban kids? Arrogant, yep. From urban, okay, the arrogant, Urban kids were loud. Kids were nicely dressed, Anyone else? Beth? And Lynn, okay. Knew very little about kids in the big cities. Okay, nice. Kind of mysterious. I was envious of their urban lifestyle. Thought the kids had a vibrant, cosmopolitan, wildly exciting life and activities. I was envious of their world. Love it. I was very protected. Nice. Okay. So I do this exercise. Sometimes I do this exercise in person. Of course, it works better in person. But I ask people to get around a flip chart and talk about your experience growing up wherever you did, and talk about, what some of the things were that were common experiences, whether you grew up in an urban setting, a suburban setting, or a rural setting. And then I get people to think about what are some of the ideas that you had about people from the other setting. And what people were able to do is very, very quickly come up with ideas about the other group, even though they had very little experience personally with members of the other group, right? Even though they had very little experience personally with members of the other group, we're able to very quickly have an idea of, oh, they're tough guys, or they're all like city slickers, they're all really sharply dressed, or they're all a little slow, or they're all a little, they're all in Catholic schools, whatever it is. We're able to very quickly come up with examples of this. So then the next question is, what if I were to put up here Christian and Jewish? Or what if I were to put up here black and white? Or what if I were to put up here Arab? Or Muslim? Or gay? Or elderly, right? It's very similar, that it's very easy for humans to be able to have a mental model of people who exist in categories other than the experiences that we've personally had based on very little first-person data. And it's important for us to remember that we are very capable of having opinions about other groups, even with very little first-person experience. Now, I'm not saying this in a judgmental way, because this is how human language is formed, where we take data and we put it into categories and then we extrapolate in order to make meaning. It's absolutely essential for human language and communication. But it's also really important as part of our cultural proficiency journey to just build in awareness, to say, you know what? And Beth, you did this, and you said, you know what? I didn't have a lot of experience with kids in other cultures. I didn't have a lot of experience with kids in the city, right? To be able to say, and to be able to think about that as we think about how we interact potentially with, our patrons who may come from a population that is different, or might have practices that are different than the practices that we're familiar with, where we may have a user community where it's absolutely typical that we interact through the mother, or where the extended family is invited to events and seen as the primary entity, not just the individual person, or where we think about communicating, where we build social relationships first, rather than just expecting people to be willing to come in and volunteer or willing to establish a relationship with our library or come to our programs without having opportunity to really get a sense of who we are and what we're about and why we do what we do and what our values are. So this is just a little reminder that it's very human and it's very natural, even around something that's as silly as where we grew up, to think, or simple or common, that we all have common experiences. We all grew up somewhere. Being able to think about, now what are the lenses that we bring to thinking about the identities of other people, and how we're perceiving them, and how might we just slow down our own thinking in order to gather enough data to make sure that we are taking the actions that are most appropriate based on what's truly informing that other person, or whatever, or some things about the other group or culture that might be helpful for us to know. There's another piece around there's another culture general slide here that I want to share with you. And remember, I talked back about culture general. These are things that don't apply only to a particular group, but that are concepts that apply across culture, the intercultural spectrum. And this slide is about how people communicate from different cultural backgrounds. It's a very old concept, and it's very useful still. This is high level. This is not meant down to the individual. This is high level, so this is a generalization. But what it describes is different ways of communicating based on where you come from, the macro culture of where you come from. I'm going to start on the right. In the United States, we are a very low context macro culture. Not everyone in the United States, right? But at a general level, the United States is a very low context macro culture. What that means is the way we communicate is very heavily focused on verbal language conveying literal and full meaning. We give heavy credence to people being able to clearly articulate a thought in a direct and linear manner. And concise is always better. And concise, you can tell concise is preferred manner of interacting because of the phenomena called PowerPoint that we're interacting with right now, right? We like bullet points, we like clear, we like concise, we like direct, and many of our systems and institutions reflect this low context communication pattern that we have in the United States. So our educational systems, our performance review, the way that we teach people to write essays, the way that we ask people to write executive summaries, the way that we tell people to give feedback, all of it is about communication being direct and close to the event. And there are clear lines between personal and professional relationships, right? So just bring your work self to work, and all that personal stuff is not necessarily doesn't necessarily need to come to work with you. Right? That's been the traditional way that we've thought about low context communication in the United States macro culture. On the left side of this slide is high context. And high context cultures really emphasize relationships and trust much more than low context, and that it's necessary to really get to the message somewhere in the verbal communication. That there's a lot of communication that's happening outside of the verbal meaning or verbal communication, right? And so let me give you an example. A few years ago, I went to China, to Beijing, for 10 days with directors of libraries from all of the Ivy institutions. So, this posse of Ivy League library directors and me, we went to China for a 10-day East-West leadership conference. It was 10 days of simultaneous translation. It was pretty intense. And there were a lot of things that happened that really exemplified high context versus low context, because China is a very high context country. So what happened was we got off the plane. Each of us individually flew over, but as soon as I got off the plane, there was somebody there at the airport to greet me. That person stayed with me throughout my entire visit, right? She got me to my hotel. In the evening, she would escort me to my hotel, when it was time for me to go to sleep after the day's festivities. The next morning, she would pick me up at my hotel room and escort me to breakfast. We'd have all of our meals together, the whole large contingency of people from all across China and our whole group from the U.S. At dinner time, we would spend hours doing rounds and rounds of toasting with wine and karaoke, very sophisticated ways of doing karaoke. And everybody knew who went first, right? Everybody knew who toasted whom and in which order, and who should jump up and do karaoke when, right? And about 3 days in, my group and I hadn't participated in karaoke. And we had been asked many times, of course, by our colleagues in China to, contribute to the karaoke festivities. There were 100+ people there because most of the folks there were from China. Everyone doing karaoke except us, and it was pretty obvious that we were not participating. So at some point I said, listen, folks, we have to do karaoke, This is as much a part of this business trip as anything. We have to show that we care and that we're gracious guests. This is the local norm. Everybody's been so generous with us. We have to do that. And they said, we don't do karaoke. I said, listen, this is not about business business is here and personal is here. In China, business and personal are very connected, and we have to establish ourselves as human beings if we're going to have a breakthrough business experience. Well, the next day, we finally conjured up the energy, and I got everyone together, all of my Ivy League directors. We all got up on stage. We wouldn't do it individually. Everybody was too chicken, but we got up.
Hello? Sorry, we have experienced a technical difficulty, and it seems that some of us are slowly coming back. Can you hear me?
Okay. All right, everyone. We're back. I'll just keep going while everyone gets back, because I know we're all kind of getting ourselves together. Everyone there? Okay, good. All right. So I was talking about the experience in China where we all got up and did karaoke. We did it together, and the importance about this karaoke was that it was a social experience that allowed us to be human with our colleagues and to really turn the corner on building a professional relationship. These were all people who worked in libraries, and there was plenty to talk about and plenty of opportunity for building coalitions between the countries. But it was only when we leaned into the cultural experience and really acknowledge that we were in a culturally different place that had different cultural expectations and behaviors that were much more about building trusting relationships and caring about some of the social time, that we were able to turn a corner. And that experience, that trip, ended up being tremendously successful, but it's because we leaned in to the new cultural experience. What I'm talking about here is, and that's an example of cultural proficiency, where you say, what is the cultural norm here? And how can I, regardless of where I'm from or what my own cultural norms are that I come from, be able to be comfortable navigating this new cultural water? For a lot of you, so I'm imagining, for example, Jose, if you're coming from Cuba and going to Louisville, right, you went probably from a very high context culture to one that is much more low context. Now, I think that there are layers of interesting things, that dynamics. Yeah, sure did. That interesting dynamics about being in Louisville, right, that are probably more high context than some other parts of the United States. But compared to Cuba, it's quite different, right? Even if you think about in the Spanish to English translation, there are many more layers of formality built into the Spanish language, for example, than in the English language. As with different dialects in Asian, different in Asian countries and in African countries, for example. And so it's really important just to be able to understand that for a lot of us who are living and navigating in U.S. context right now, we are also inviting colleagues, staff members from other cultural backgrounds to come and participate in what is often a very low context cultural experience from an organizational perspective. And we need to help and mentor and coach them on how to translate into what are often very low context organizations. And our patrons, our users, are oftentimes coming from different cultural backgrounds. And so navigating the way we work here. So another example is, and this was years ago, I was working with the University of Michigan, and they asked me to go out and talk about an interaction that one of the librarians, a woman librarian, had with a graduate student, a Chinese graduate student, and how she felt like some of these Chinese male students were disrespecting her because she was a woman, and she thought that it was a gender issue. And so I went out to have some conversation with her and with some of the other folks in the international office on campus. What I asked, tell me what the experience is. Tell me what the experience is that triggered this. And she said, well, one of the students, a Chinese man, came to her and gave her a slip of paper and handed it to her with a call number on it and said, get, G-E-T. And she would try to point out to him, she would try to give him directions to where it was that he should go, and he would just keep handing the paper back to her, the slip of paper back to her, saying the same thing over and over, get. She was incredibly offended by this, and it ended up kind of going up the food chain as an example of gender bias. After doing a little bit more dialogue around this, what we found is that there were a couple of things that were quite different. One, this man was coming from a country that did not have open stacks. He had never in his life heard of, until going to this university, the possibility of him going into the stacks and getting his own research material. He did not know that was an option. And he was only using minimal English because he did not feel comfortable with the English language, because even though many students in China at that time were taught to read, write, and speak English, their opportunity to practice speaking English was very, very limited because it's such a homogeneous country. So even though he could read and write English, his ability to speak it was much more uncomfortable for him, and he felt intimidated. And then the third thing was that in his country and in his experience to date, librarians are much, much higher social stature. In the United States, we're much more kind of egalitarian than in some cultures where there's very, very significant layers between different social classes. And librarians are seen as, academic librarians in that specific example, were seen as having a much higher social stature. And so he was deferring to her by not, using clumsy English as he described it in front of her. My point here, and with an example like this, is that it's really important for us as we think about identity, not just our own, but also those of others, and understand that we may not know all of the different things that people are coming with. We may not have enough data or experience personally, and it's oftentimes through our own lenses that we're interpreting an interaction that may not actually be meant to be offensive, that may just be coming from a very different cultural experience, that if we pause and inquire and use it as an opportunity to investigate, we may actually come to a deeper appreciation and understanding of where the misunderstanding lays. Again, it's that iceberg analogy. It's that the stuff that we stub our toe against is way under the waterline. And oftentimes there's an opportunity for getting over what seems like a miscommunication or something that is offensive if we give ourselves the permission to ask questions, to listen, to suspend judgment, and also to think about what it is that we ourselves are bringing to the equation. Are we thinking openly? Are we waiting to jump to judgment, and instead assuming that there may be a different cultural experience on the other end of this that we could learn from? So, and there's Jose. Oh, and I'm seeing there's more about Cuba, and there's Jose's Cuba is different from my Cuba. And respect kept me out of trouble all the time. Yes, yes, yes. That's exactly right. Nice. So this slide is a really helpful one. It's also consistent with the culture general because it helps us just to remember that we have to respect that we don't always know everything and we don't always have to know everything. But it is good to be able to suspend judgment long enough to inquire and then feel like, this navigating different cultural waters is absolutely a task that we're all up to. We've all had experience with it, and we'll continue to have experiences with it. Does any of this look familiar to you, some of this high context, low context stuff? We're just about at closure here, but does any of this look familiar to you? Anyone? Okay. Somewhat. Okay. This is there's actually a lot of work done around this from interculturalist literature that shows kind of the layers and layers. Yes, Beth, yes. I'm assuming that Nicaragua is much more high context than New Jersey. And in the United States, we might say New Jersey is high context, right, compared to some other places potentially. But when you go and immerse yourself in a different culture where the norms around communication and relationships are altogether different, then it really becomes apparent and much more pronounced. And it's also really wonderful just to have a sense of this because a lot of us, like me, I'm African American. I identify as African American, and I consider myself to have more of an African American communication style. When I went into the work world, when I first went into the work world, I hit a lot of walls. And I stubbed my toe against that iceberg a number of times because what people wanted from me were proposals and executive summaries and grants that are very linear and prescriptive, and reports that were written in just so a manner, very clear, concise, direct. And I wanted to tell a story, right? And so being able to think about how it is that we help people, including ourselves, bring forward our own true voice and assets, regardless of where that sits, and also navigate efficiently and proficiently the cultural waters that we're in at the time, for ourselves and also for other people. Because professionally speaking, and also as we think about our users and our customers and our patrons, it's really a gift for us to be able to help them navigate new cultural waters, and for us to be clear enough about the fact that there's just some different identities at play here that will that we could bring some compassion and empathy around in order to help people be more successful, including ourselves. So it is time, I think, for us to wrap up. It is 11:30, and I want to just ask you, are there any comments, any closing comments? We're going to pick up on this conversation in a couple of additional webcasts that I'll do in the future. But are there any closing comments? As these comments are coming up, I just want to thank all of you for your time today and your participation, and especially thank you for contributing via the chat. I know I'm a little slow reading because the font is small, but I really deeply appreciate all of the contributions that you have made. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you. And yes, the PowerPoints will be made available to you. Absolutely. Cultural adaptation takes a long time. That's absolutely right.
And I'll take this opportunity while everyone else is typing in the chat box, or not, to thank you, Dieta, for a very wonderful webinar in spite of our little blip or technical time warp there for a moment. I apologize for that. We are very lucky to have been able to have you participate in this learning opportunity and journey with us, Dieta. Thank you. I'm also excited to have, and I thank Jeanette Sherwin of the Deaf and Hard of Hearing Center here in Fort Myers with us. You saw her in the top, and you still see her, she's not gone yet, at the right-hand corner of your screen, and she was providing sign language interpretation of what Dieta was presenting. So at Swiftland, we're really excited to have her here as part of our webinar team, and we hope to continue with this accessibility enhancement for all of our webinars going forward. Now I'll give you a sneak peek of what's coming up. Diversity Discovery Institute Year 2 continues next year, thanks to the holiday season. On January 22nd, we will have V is for Versatility, presented by Linda Bruno. We have new topics for each letters of the word diversity, as you very well know. And I want to tell you now, and it's a reminder for those of you that have been in the prior D is for with Yolanda Cuesta, next year's Y is not going to be a webinar like we had in the prior fiscal year. It is an in-person diversity day, and we hope that you all will be able to join us on August 24th, 2016. Yes, we do have it scheduled. Yes, it is on the calendar. Please pencil that date in. Register all early and register often, and please come to join us. December is going to bring the third webinar for Swiftland's DigiRef Academy on December 10th, where Dr. Naomi Gold will be exploring the digital ready reference materials. And on December 15th, why don't you come and learn about the science of STEAM, formerly known as STEM, morphing into STREAM, in our next Getting Steamy in the Library webinar series. We hope you are all able to join us for all these upcoming opportunities. So please feel free to keep checking our CE calendar on our website, the Florida statewide calendar, our Facebook page, your Facebook page. If you've liked us, please like us. Follow us on Twitter, or look for your friendly message in the listserv. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Have a terrific weekend and a wonderful Thanksgiving holiday next week for all of you. And I finally shut up. I see that Lynn is looking forward to the future webinars. Dieta is a very valuable, necessary topic, not to address in a single session. That's right. That's why it's designed this way. Thank you for noting that. Anybody have any closing remarks?
I'll thank everyone. Thank you all so much. Have a happy Thanksgiving. I look forward to our future interactions. Take care, everyone.